indicative of the split in the Democratic Party and the fact that they just, do they want a candidate and the direction of the Democratic Party to go with someone like Zohran and Bernie Sanders and AOC and the left and progressives, and do they just not dig their heels in, but do they just dive into that left progressive message?
This reminds me of when a boxer is knocked out early in a fight and you're like, wow, he just got his butt kicked. And then the guy's like, I'm fine, I want a rematch. And you're like, no, you don't want a rematch. You're gonna get your butt kicked again, and that's usually what happens.
Welcome to New York One's Off Topic on Politics. I'm Courtney Gross, New York One's investigative reporter. New York City may, in November, have a Democratic Socialist as a mayor. We obviously had a massive primary election this week, and the results, as it stands now, we're taping on Thursday afternoon, is Zohran Mamdani is the leading candidate in this primary with 43.5% of the vote, besting Andrew Cuomo in first choice votes alone. That's all we have thus far, by 7 points. Brad Lander came in third with 11% of the vote. We will break down the results neighborhood by neighborhood and discuss what this may mean for November. Will Andrew Cuomo stay in the race on an independent ballot line? And how is Mayor Eric Adams already going after Mamdani? Could Republicans rally behind Adams? We'll get to all of it. Joining me for the discussion is our Bobby Cuza.
Hey, Courtney. Anybody going to mispronounce Mamdani's name this week?
Now we have to. Well, not the best thing that happened on election night, but maybe one of the funny elements that happened that we didn't talk about when we had our special episode earlier this week was Tish James was out on the stage taking some of the credit for Mamdani's win, or certainly sucking up all the limelight of it. And she was like, say his name. Yeah. And then she mispronounced
it as she was introducing him.
Yeah.
Maybe no one will learn. It's easy to butcher.
I guess.
Mamdani.
Our political director, Bob Hardt, is also here.
Or maybe he'll just become like Zohran or something, or ZM. Like AOC.
Yeah, maybe. So we have been looking at the results. I know that, we were just talking in the newsroom like, oh, what did my neighborhood do? What did my block do? And we know it's clear that Mamdani won Manhattan, he won Brooklyn, he won Queens, and he certainly made inroads in areas that were potentially unexpected. I mean, I was focusing in on Upper Manhattan in particular, which we had thought was going to be Cuomo country. I'm talking about Washington Heights or Inwood or even parts of Harlem, honestly, where Mamdani won those districts. I mean, these are areas. I was with Andrew Cuomo in Harlem just a few weeks ago when he was getting the endorsement of Keith Wright and Governor David Patterson. And those were neighborhoods that went for Mamdani.
Yeah, Mamdani really, there were areas where Cuomo needed to clean up, where he either just won or lost to Mamdani. So like these working class black districts that I think Cuomo thought he was going to win overwhelmingly, he didn't. There weren't these places where Cuomo romped. There were plenty of places, though, if you look, where Mamdani romped and did really, really well.
And even the areas where Cuomo won, sometimes when you look at the map and it's color coded and you see, the orange for Mamdani and the purple for Cuomo, it might look deep purple, but the turnout wasn't what he needed it to be. And I was talking to this guy, Michael Lang, who's he's like one of these political savants who looks at all the data and it broken down by election district. And he analyzed the results and he said a big factor, I mean, there's a lot of factors, right? But one of them was that Mamdani, he did, which we kind of had a hunch he might do, is turn out young voters in huge numbers. So in places like, they call it the Commie Corridor, Astoria, Greenpoint.
When did we start calling it the Commie Corridor?
Now. We just started calling it now.
Okay.
Well, people, what is the expression for what the Western Queens, Astoria?
I would just say a very progressive area of New York City. I wouldn't go Commie Corridor.
It's where like all the young, super lefty, progressives, hipsters.
Byrne likes to call them hippies, even though
Bernadette Hogan calls them hippies on the air sometimes. I think she's conflating the two terms.
Yeah.
Those neighborhoods, obviously they turned out for Mamdani, which we all expected, but the numbers were huge. Like Michael Lang was telling me in some election districts in Greenpoint, it was like 3 times the turnout they had in 2021. And these are all Mamdani voters. So then there were areas of central Brooklyn that Cuomo did win, that he expected to win, but the turnout wasn't high enough.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of other stuff going on. Like Mamdani did better with Latino voters than maybe people thought he would. There's a huge Asian turnout, and not just South Asians, which you might have expected in places like Richmond Hill with a big South Asian population, but even in the Chinatowns, like Chinatown in Manhattan and Flushing and Queens, he did well in those areas as well. So he overperformed across a lot of different demographics. But another interesting thing is that, and I'm sure you guys have seen some of the numbers where Cuomo does really well among the lowest income New Yorkers, which is kind of counterintuitive because Mamdani is supposed to be the candidate, of the lower class.
Affordability.
But Cuomo does really well with super low income and also with the uber wealthy. So when you look at those color-coded maps, you look at like Fifth Avenue right by Central Park, it's all Cuomo.
Well, the Upper West
But then so is the Bronx
too.
and the Upper West Side too.
I mean, that spells, we're going to get to this, so I don't want to jump ahead. Look, I'll just put a pin in it. Actually, I'm not.
Well, I mean, the other thing is that early voting was double what it was 4 years ago. And my wife, who's a reporter at WNYC, noted that a quarter of the early voters were new voters.
Right.
And so, you figure out that most of those early voters are Mamdani voters.
Yeah, that speaks to, is this a cannibalization of Cuomo's electorate and his base? Was the Cuomo base going for Mamdani, or was this an expansion of the electorate? And I would say it's more expansion in my mind and looking at the results and looking at the neighborhoods than necessarily Mamdani flipping Cuomo supporters.
I agree. And then maybe some moderates staying home too, maybe?
Yeah. It was really hot. I mean, we all were there. It was all the listeners are there too. It was super hot.
Well, we thought early voting was going to go to Mamdani and day of voting was going to go to Cuomo, which it did ever so slightly.
Right.
But I was in a news meeting warning everyone, okay, the high water mark for Mamdani is going to be at 9:05 when all the early votes are in, when 400,000 votes are in or so.
Right.
I was right.
But
the water went down just a little bit.
It was 2 points,
from 9 points to 7 points.
Right. We thought it was going to disappear maybe.
Right.
Yeah. We thought it could have been a 2-point race. And I think, we can admit this to our viewers now, but I think at least I was on set thinking that it was Mamdani's night, that he was going to win. I was pretty much prepared going into election night that he would win. I did thinking the same thing in 2000, what was it, last year, 2024? I'm like, where are we? What day is it? When Trump won, I went into election nights ready to sit on the desk and do election night coverage all night, knowing that he was going to win. I mean, at least that was my hunch, my prediction, what was in my gut.
I mean, the big surprise, obviously, is we all thought we're going to have to wait till Tuesday when the computers turn on. And I think that this was not a scenario in a lot of people's minds that Cuomo would concede that night. And that's why the turning on of the computers on Tuesday at noon is now just sort of pro forma.
Yeah, if you had put a gun to my head, I would have said Cuomo's going to win on election night. He's going to end up ahead by 3 to 5 points, and then Mamdani will win on the ranked.
That's exactly what I thought. I totally agree with you.
But once we saw, like you said, he started out, was it 9 points? 9 points. At 9:05 when we got the first tranche of results. But then all of a sudden it's 9:15, it's 9:20, it's 9:25.
It became clear pretty quickly.
And the numbers aren't going down. And that's when, to me, we couldn't say this on the air. Maybe now we can say it on the podcast. At 9:25, I was done. In my mind, I was like, this is over. There's no way Cuomo comes back from this.
It wasn't a huge. It was a huge turnout. More people turned out than normal, but we still haven't reached more than 1 million voters. And we're putting all the numbers together before Tuesday night, looking at how many people turned out in the last couple of elections, specifically Democratic primaries, and the most in the last couple of years, we'll say decades, was in 1989 when they had more than 1 million voters came out in the Dinkins-Koch Democratic primary. And right now, what I looked at last night with 96% of the vote in is 993,000.
So we'll get to 1 million probably, right? I think
7,000 votes. Yeah, I guess with absentee and but not as much as 89.
So in 89 though, that was also a higher percentage. That was almost 50% of registered Democrats, and this is going to be like 33%.
Yeah.
So it is amazing what an epic race that was. The incumbent mayor losing to David Dinkins in this battle royal. So,
but also it may not look like huge turnout, but it can still be true that Mamdani turned out all these new voters and energized voters. But then maybe it was the Cuomo voters who stayed home, some of whom stayed home.
Yeah.
So he may have turned out a lot of new voters, and the overall universe of votes may not have gone up that much.
Yeah.
You know
So,
what
I mean, I guess to summarize the surprises from election night, is he obviously did, well, not surprises, but to summarize election night and who his base is going into November, thinking about what the future might look like for him, is obviously young voters, white voters, highly educated voters, more affluent voters. He did better with Latinos than expected, so we might think that they'll stick with him. And then obviously I would say Asian voters as well.
I think the last poll we were looking at, though, I remember saying to Bobby, wow, the best ethnic group for Mamdani in this one poll was Latinos.
Because, well, he attributed it to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's endorsement.
I think I'm sort of jumping the gun. I think this all spells bad news for anyone who's not named Zohran Mamdani in the November election, because this isn't like one of those things where you're like, well, he won narrowly and maybe there's a path for Cuomo in November, or the ultra liberal vote put this person over the top. He won resoundingly on primary night.
Yeah.
And I realize it's a different group of voters, but these people aren't going away who are very, very excited about Zohran Mamdani.
Yeah.
He still, I'm going to argue, I mean, even Bill de Blasio was on our show this week talking about how, what does he do now? What's the direction of Mamdani politically in order to make sure that he can continue this energy, momentum, and support and enthusiasm going into November? Well, he needs to still expand his electorate. And even de Blasio was saying he probably needs to, and even sources, I'm thinking beyond the sources I've been talking to that are in real estate or in business, or talking about he should deliver some sort of speech, perhaps on Israel and Palestine and the West Bank and the war, to clarify where he stands. And I know he's tried to clarify his position multiple times and people continue to just pound on it. But this goes back to the Upper West Side, where Upper West Side is like a liberal bastion of very progressive politics. You would think that all of those voters would kind of be in Mamdani's camp. They're highly educated and pretty rich and very progressive. And they didn't vote for him. And
they voted for Brad Lander. If you look, there's like two election districts, like in Manhattan, or maybe three, that went to
for
someone
Lander.
else, and they went for Lander. There's no way those people, no, there's a way. I think that Mamdani will win those districts, since there was a coalition between Lander and Mamdani. But I think from listening to Mamdani, was it after midnight?
Yeah.
He did already start that olive branch part, and the speech was very good. And then watching him in a very long interview on MSNBC last night, also talk big tent.
Yeah.
Watching that, if I worked for him, God forbid, it just seemed like he knew what he
Like, God forbid.
I don't want to be working for a politician. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm going to be here longer, hopefully, than these politicians.
Than these are, yeah.
But anyways, I think so far he said everything that he should be saying, which is expanding the size of the tent. Everyone's welcome. I need to I'm paraphrasing. I need to put myself in other people's shoes more. I mean, I really felt that speech touched on that on election on primary night.
I mean, he has to calm nerves, because there's a whole segment of New York City that is freaking out right now.
Right.
In the business, the real estate community, the business, and the donor class. These people gave millions and millions of dollars to Andrew Cuomo, or at least they put it towards trying to get him elected.
$25 million.
And now they're like, what do we do? They're not, and they're clearly abandoning Cuomo, even if Cuomo, even in a universe where Cuomo runs in November. But where are they going to go? Are they going to give that money? Are they going to put that behind Eric Adams? Are they going to try some Hail Mary and find a new candidate to somehow run
the New York Post today was amazing. Because I'm on the ferry reading it.
Scam Donnie, was that
and
the
it's
headline?
Immediately the pivot has already been made to Eric Adams. It's almost like they never left Eric Adams, and there's like a column saying
they're like, what indictment?
He's perfectly imperfect, and it was very Orwellian that suddenly it's like this paper that has really taken on Eric Adams is suddenly in his corner.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of 2013 after Bill de Blasio won, when the sky was falling, and people forget the mayor's not a king. Yeah. There's a governor, there's a legislature, but I do agree with you. I don't want to minimize, if you're a Jewish New Yorker, that you are very worried about your own safety, your own security. Does this person, the new mayor or mayor in waiting, does this person think that Israel should exist, which is an extremely important issue for a lot of people. But again, the mayor of New York City, yes, you'd like him to be your cheerleader, but he isn't going to decide whether or not Israel is going to exist or not.
So Jerry Nadler put out a statement, and we should talk about the reaction to so many of New York electeds and national electeds, honestly, because New York electeds are national electeds in many cases, but he put out this statement yesterday saying New Yorkers want Democrats who will fight for an affordable New York by bringing costs down and taking on big corporations, and they want elected leaders they can trust and believe in, which is why I'm proud to support Zohran Mamdani in the general election. We've seen a number of other elected officials come out with that somewhat full-throated endorsement saying, okay, let's pivot, let's do Big Tent, let's now support Mamdani, including the Brooklyn Democratic Party chairwoman, Rodney's Bashat Hermelin. But we've not seen the same from other really big-name Democrats, including, obviously, the House minority leader Hakeem Jeffries and the minority leader in the Senate, U.S. Senator Charles Schumer.
Yeah, but they put out statements that were like kind of vaguely positive about, sort of acknowledging the victory and saying they would meet with him.
Yeah, I mean, he's not the nominee yet, in
Right.
everyone's defense.
Right. So
of Jewish voters.
Right.
I think the images of Lander and Mamdani together at the end of the campaign, they kept on, Lander in particular kept on saying, we can guide and, lead this city as a Jewish person, as a Muslim person. We didn't even talk about that. Like the fact that, as a Mamdani, it's been such a huge part of the campaign, but he is the first major candidate on a Democratic Party ticket to be a Democratic candidate for mayor as a Muslim, especially like a Muslim in a post 9/11 environment is, do we think it's surprising? It's huge, but I thought that message of Lander and Mamdani together, saying, especially given what's happening in the Middle East, given the controversy of what Mamdani has said.
And I thought it is interesting throughout the campaign that Mamdani acknowledged his faith and he didn't shy away from it. He talked about it,
at all.
But he also didn't really lean into it either. Right. I mean, I feel like.
I mean, it's not like he was saying, I will be the first Muslim mayor.
Right.
But it's, I don't think he was. Errol had the stat just when we had our special podcast
about all the mosques he had visited.
150 mosques in the last week.
Which is obviously smart politics. If there's estimates, there's what, like a million?
760,000, I think.
Okay. Courtney comes out with the exact.
How many did Cuomo visit?
Yeah. Cuomo may or may not have visited one at one point in the past 20 years. But Mamdani, I mean, yes. And he obviously tried to activate those voters. But I just thought it was noteworthy that he was so focused on his message, which was affordability. Somebody made a point, somebody smarter than me, I think I saw it on social media, I forget who it was. They said that he was actually embodying the Eric Adams ethos of no distractions.
Yeah.
Wait, what is it again? No distractions.
And grind.
Grind. Focus. No distractions. And grind. I mean, he was so dialed into the affordability thing, and even
last night on Jen Psaki on MSNBC, he was saying expand Big Tent, but he wasn't saying I'm going to take on Trump. I'm going to be this foil.
Right.
He was like, no, buses. Childcare, freeze the rent.
It was always came back to that. So it wasn't identity politics. It wasn't like I'm going to take on Trump. I mean, he talked about Trump. He acknowledged, and he mentioned Trump in his election night speech. But it wasn't about Trump. It wasn't about Israel. It wasn't about defund the police. I mean, he also didn't totally run away from his positions, and some of his old positions, but he just focused on affordability because he knew that was what was going to resonate with people. And it worked.
Yeah.
Well, Cuomo's message was the city's not safe.
Right.
And Mamdani's message was the city's not affordable.
Yeah.
And it turns out the city was safe enough. Like maybe in 1990, the Cuomo message, when the city's crime was out of control.
Or in 2021, it worked for Adams.
Correct, in the wake of COVID. But clearly, the biggest concern, at least with the Democratic voters, is affordability, not whether or not they're going to get mugged.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, Cuomo and the other candidates, they all talked about affordability too, right? I mean, like affordable housing may have been the number one issue that we heard these candidates talk. Everybody talked about it. But obviously, Mamdani was an effective messenger. I mean, that's a whole nother dimension of the race, was that he was so good at delivering the message.
And people compare him to, in retrospect now, national people are saying, oh, he's like Obama. Like he's like just his rhetoric, the way of delivery. Like
great communicator.
He can deliver a speech effectively.
And somebody, I think it was Errol, liked to talk about the contrast. I mean, there's so many contrasts between Mamdani and Cuomo, right? But one of them was that walk that he took last Friday night along. He walked the whole length of Manhattan, which at first when I heard he was doing that, I was like, oh, this is kind of a cheap stunt.
Well,
but
it might have been, but it might have been.
But it was so, I mean, I saw the video.
The video they
can
put
it be
out
a cheap
after.
stunt and really smart at the same
Yeah.
time?
And,
Poor Bernadette was trying to meet up with him, and like she was supposed to be the top of the show with him at the top of the walk on Friday night, and then pre-primary night, obviously, and like she couldn't catch up with him. He was moving too fast, or like he wasn't there. Like we just she like missed him and ended up having to do a hit without him. But
it was. So I saw the video. I don't know if we had any video, but I saw the video that the campaign put out, and it's amazing. He's walking Manhattan. People like all these people are cheering for him.
Different neighborhoods, different like people of all colors, stripes, seasons, whatever.
And the contrast with Cuomo, right? Cuomo drives his car everywhere and double parks. And there's that
turns against the signal, right?
He turned right on red at one point. There was video of him doing this. Meanwhile, Mamdani doesn't have a car, right? He gets around on mass transit. He lives in a
stabilized apartment in Astoria.
And Cuomo, you were going to see Andrew Cuomo walk the length of Manhattan. Cuomo was like hardly out there interacting with voters at all. I mean, when you saw, that's a little unfair. I mean, he did go to churches and he was, but like even when he was campaigning, our Ayanna Harry did some stories when she was with Cuomo campaigning, but they were on the top of a like flatbed truck.
You don't even like leave the truck.
Right. So he's waving to people, but he's not really
being governor, running for governor is very different than running for mayor. And even though the city's humongous in terms of population, people like the image of their mayor meeting people and pressing the flesh in a way that I don't think it's required as much if you're running for governor.
Howard Glazer, who used to be his secretary, right? Which is, he sounds like a menial position, but it's the most powerful position in state government. And he worked with him in the beginning of the Cuomo years in Albany, and he put out this tweet, which I don't have in front of me, and our internet's not great in the podcast room, so I can't really pull it up. It was basically, you ran for a job you never, I mean, it was much more eloquent than what I'm going to say, but you ran for a job that you didn't really want, like no surprises that you didn't do it successfully. But hold that thought, Bob, because I do, for our podcast listeners, we're going to take a very quick break. Our YouTube listeners, stick with us. We're going to keep talking. Okay, so we were just talking about Cuomo's train or flatbed truck or
Mamdani's
Dodge
bus.
Charger. Okay, so but the Cuomo Charger, the Cuomo train,
that's a Dodge Charger, just to be clear.
Yes, sorry.
Not like a phone charger.
No. It's actually an expensive car. I looked it up. It's like
we always call it a muscle car. Is it really a muscle car? I don't know.
Well, let's not digress too far. Let's not go down this like weird car rabbit hole. So where is he? I mean, he has this independent ballot line. Is he going to run? What is his fate?
So as of Thursday, as of today, he has not officially said what he's doing. But I was saying before, this reminds me of when a boxer is knocked out early in a fight and you're like, wow, he just got his butt kicked. And then the guy's like, I'm fine, I want a rematch. And you're like, no, you don't want a rematch. You're going to get your butt kicked again. And that's usually what happens. It wasn't a close fight. And then now also there's the aura around the boxer and around this politician of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Hey, this person doesn't lose. Well, this person badly lost.
Yeah. The
stench of defeat is now around him.
Right.
And that's going to be a problem for the anti-Mamdani forces. Do you really want to put all of your money into this vessel that clearly was already leaking in the primary?
Well, and they've already abandoned him, right? I mean, like we said, Bill Clinton has abandoned him a lot. We already talked about Rodney Spichat abandoned him. So if he's going to go at it in November, he's probably going to be going at it alone, or at least more alone than he was in
Not necessarily, because there is a freak out among the city's billionaire class elite real estate developers. I mean, Stu Lozer, who is a Bloomberg press secretary, was on set with me for election night, and he was like fielding calls from the business community, I believe, or the tech community, of people panicking because they are like, what is going to happen with this person who's a socialist who's going to run the city, and what's going to happen to my businesses?
But what is going to happen? Like, exactly, is he going to be like Lenin and Trotsky and everything's going to get seized?
So
I mean, the mayor only has so much power, as we've learned through covering City Hall over the last few decades.
But his policies frighten the business community. I mean, he wants to raise taxes on corporations and the top 1%.
Right.
And, I was speaking to the partnership for New York City.
Freeze on rent
yes. So I feel like the Rent Stabilization Association, and that doesn't exist anymore. The new name that they have for it, I forget. Landlords who own rent stabilized apartments, might not be they're not related, right? But
no, and that's a legitimate concern if you're a landlord and you have a rent stabilized apartment that, hey, I'm not going to get an increase. I think that's a fair fear.
I need to make sure my apartments are actually going to be up to snuff and not dangerous, and make sure that the sink is running and the fridge is working and all this stuff. So they want money for obviously improvements to make the apartments nicer. At least that's the nice way of looking at it versus just lining their own pockets.
And by the way, is it going to be frozen for 4 years?
Yeah,
or frozen for
the first
8
year,
years, right?
Or I wasn't even thinking that it would be frozen for the full 4 years. Maybe it would just be. But I guess, is it a commitment for the whole 4 years?
It certainly felt like it from the campaign trail.
So all these people that were funding Fix the City, I'm looking at my phone because I'm trying to, our service isn't great in the podcast room, but I had a tweet that had been put out by Bill Ackman, and people might be like, who's that? Who cares? Well, he's a billionaire who funded Fix the City, with the exception, Mike Bloomberg donated the most, but Bill Ackman was one of the top donors to this thing as well. And he's a Trump supporter as well. And he's pretty active on Twitter. And he put out this plea for write-in candidates saying, basically, the billionaire class, I'll take care of your fundraising. And we need someone, the city is freaking out, and so we need someone who's not going to, I'm paraphrasing because my internet doesn't work, but we need someone who's not going to ruin the city.
Right, and who's that going to be?
Well, I mean,
there is a write-in campaign.
Right, I mean, you also have Curtis Sliwa, who's probably going to be the Republican nominee.
He is the Republican.
Right, unless he drops out or something.
Well, the only way that Curtis Sliwa is no longer on the ticket, and this could lead us to the next part of this conversation, is if he dies or if he moves out of state or he gets another
judicial nomination.
Yes. And nobody, in my conversations with the Republican sources this week, nobody thinks that Curtis is going to do that this was the thought here is that somehow Curtis would leave and Mayor Eric Adams would have the Republican line. And the question now is, if Cuomo doesn't continue, will all these billionaire class people like Bill Ackman, who even put out some complimentary things about Mayor Eric Adams earlier, right after the Democratic primary, will all of these people who had abandoned Mayor Adams because obviously of the indictment and the association with corruption, would they start lining up behind Adams? Adams had this huge kickoff today at City Hall. Kelly Mena was there. Lots of people were there. It was crowded. It looked packed. It certainly had the perception that, he's got a real campaign to run.
And the New York Post is clearly on board. Mm-hmm. Picking up the New York Post today, it's clear that they are on Team Eric Adams after sort of dissing him over the last nearly 4 years. But who's the most powerful Republican in the country?
Donald Trump.
Right.
If Donald Trump were to weigh in, I was hearing that Curtis would it would give the Republican County chair people the authority, or at least the gumption, to go ahead and tell Curtis, hey, you got to move out of state for a little while.
No, they would just nominate him for a judicial. You can get him off the ballot by nominating him for a judgeship. Even if you're not a judge, I think you can still be nominated for one.
Go away for a little while.
But whatever Donald Trump wants, he will get. So if he wants Eric Adams to be the Republican nominee, it's happening. If he doesn't care, then the status quo will continue.
There are definitely these conversations happening right now.
Right. I mean, I do think I would love to know what Donald Trump wants, because he could single-handedly decide who the Republican nominee is.
Or does Donald Trump like having Zohran Mamdani as a foil?
Absolutely.
Having this lunatic, radical, Muslim socialist in charge of New York City, who he can make this boogeyman. And we've already seen the Republicans
the NRCC, the National Republican Campaign Committee, is already putting Zohran Mamdani with pictures of the vulnerable purple district New York lawmakers out on Twitter, next to Laura Gillen. There is Zohran Mamdani, and they're saying this is what's gonna come for you.
So do you want the foil or do you want the puppet? I guess is what you want. Do you want a mayor for 4 years who will do whatever you want, which is essentially what we're seeing from Eric Adams right now, or do you want this great cartoonish foil? So I don't know.
To help you with the midterms, right? Because his poll numbers, Trump's poll numbers, are going down. So if he had someone out there as a boogeyman, then maybe that helps him keep the states. Certainly would keep the New York seats.
So maybe he just stays out and doesn't get involved at all.
Well, and by the way, not all Republican, maybe the Republican county leaders get in line and agree. I mean, we're totally getting ahead of ourselves, but yeah, maybe they agree to put Eric Adams on the ticket, but that doesn't mean all the Republican voters in New York City are going to vote for Eric Adams.
But I think
they don't. Plenty of Republican voters don't like Eric Adams.
Yeah.
This goes back to what I was saying before, is like Mamdani, while needs to like bring in the Big Ten and maybe have some speech about, Israel and Palestine and his thoughts on, anti-Semitism and just clarify things, put that out there. There is going to be a segment of the New York population who, you're seeing it on Twitter, and I get it. It's a billionaire class, and like maybe they're just louder than everybody else, and it's hard to actually tell because there were hundreds of thousands of people who obviously are very excited about voting and did vote for Zohran Mamdani. But there are people who feel like he does not represent him.
Sure. And the fact we're even talking about the possibility of an Eric Adams comeback is incredible.
I think it's real.
Possible.
I think it's real,
but I think it's really hard.
I was thinking, we were talking up until 36 hours ago, we all thought Andrew Cuomo was going to be running in November no matter what. Right? Because we thought, okay, if he loses, it'll be close and he'll still run in November. Now,
he got knocked out.
It's quite possible, if not likely, and maybe even by the time people are listening to this podcast, we'll know that Andrew Cuomo is not running in November. So there's this huge pie of the electorate that we thought Andrew Cuomo was going to win in November. And where do those voters go?
Some go to Adams, some go to the Slee ones, and I think some will actually go
to Jim Walden.
No, to go to Mamdani too.
To go to Mamdani, yeah.
Those are the voters of the traditional electorate. These are the voters that got Mayor Eric Adams elected in the first place. They're Black voters, they're Jewish voters. I'm trying to think of the rest of his winning coalition. Who else do you think would be involved in that? These are the people that are potentially up for grabs here, even though Mamdani obviously won some of them over. So maybe I'm wrong.
The outer borough, ethnic voters.
Yeah, look at the map, Southeast Queens. He did, but there are some Bangladeshi communities in Southeast Queens, and there were some districts in Hollis areas where Mamdani won.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that the enthusiasm gap is real. And I think that the Mamdani base is very large and probably growing. And everyone likes a winner, and he's a big winner. And I think he's going to get a lot of positive attention. Yes, he'll get negative stories written about him. But what negative thing wasn't already written or said about him?
Right.
And he was outspent because of that PAC for Cuomo.
Just one other thought about Mayor Adams, and we got to wrap it up, is that will Adams even run the campaign that would allow him to pick up these voters and turn the page on the corruption and what his first term was like? Because Kelly Meadows out there at this big rally at City Hall, and who else is there? Winnie Greco, Brianna Suggs.
Right.
These are people that were tied up in the investigation.
His apartments were raided by the FBI.
Yep.
And the other problem for Adams, besides that he can't clean house clearly, is that he's viewed as too closely tied to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's not that popular in New York City. He won 30% of the vote. And so that's another problem. It's not like Rudy Giuliani, when he was, people think of him as this cartoon character. He was a very pragmatic. He didn't even go to the Republican National Convention in 1996. The problem for Adams is he looks too, I was joking that he's the puppet. That's the problem for him. He doesn't look independent ever. When is he ever going to break ranks with Donald Trump? He has to show some independence, and he hasn't been able to do that.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there for this week's episode. Thank you all for listening. Remember, you can always watch us on Inside City Hall Monday through Friday at 7, and we love your feedback. Leave us an email at yourstorynewark1@charter.com. You can subscribe to Off Topic wherever you get your podcasts, and you can leave us a review. You can also leave us some comments on YouTube. We love that as well. Thanks to our producer, Anthony Roman in the corner. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week.